Okay, I've had the pleasure of knowing Dick since the 1961, I believe. He was a member of the Journeyman with John Phillips and Scotty McKenzie. He can tell you more about that. He's a master a banjo player, a historian. Has studied in the past the Indians among others, and is an ethnomusicologist. And he's going to talk a little bit about the role of music then and now in terms of how it relates to social movements and protest songs. Did I get it that about right, Dick?
Sure. Yeah, it's fine. Um, I am a musician and a writer. Those are basically the two things that I know anything about. And I'm mostly focused on American roots music, which means not especially pop music, but pop music when it interacts with things like blues and country music and so on and so forth. So I am very interested in all those sort of connections or lack of connections. And before the rest of it gotten here, Arnie and I were talking about how there was a period when music was very important in the political sphere. I think probably somewhere between the civil rights movement and the Vietnamese War, the war in Vietnam, was when music was a major part of the uh, what do we want to say, the to transform this country from its sort of Warren Harding days into something a little more equitable for people. And now the way that that's presented itself is that most of the major people have disappeared or they've changed their focus. It's pretty hard to imagine today exactly what it is that Bob Dylan has to say about much of anything. Uh, so he transformed from the political to the personal and um, was certainly an eye on the marketplace. Uh, Pete Seeger, of course, has been dead for a while. Some of the people that you might have associated with uh, political folk music are either dead, retired, or on the verge of retirement. And the people that are more active uh, tend to be regional artists rather than people that influence the mass market. So that's a basic change. And Arnold and I were talking about the warfare in country music that's going on now, where country music in the pop vein has historically been pretty conservative, although the roots of country music are more complex than that. And now we have maybe half dozen Black artists emerging in country music. We have people who are more politically aware. And then we also have the remnants of the early thing, like where I was talking about the song "Don't Try That in a Small Town," which is a neo-fascist song that tells people who are living in big cities to be careful what they do in small towns because it won't go over very well there, where people are still driving tractors and shooting deer on the weekends and all that sort of thing. So this has never been this open before in country music. I think people who were even Democrats in Nashville were in the closet. Tim McGraw was one of the few popular country artists that was, an out Democrat, so to speak. And now that's beginning to change. And if you saw, which maybe some of you did, the Grammys, there was Luke Combs singing Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, which is a very thoughtful protest song that goes back to the late 80s. And she happens to be a Black lesbian. So there he is on stage with her and telling us that it was one of his favorite songs when he was in high school, because she's in her 60s and I don't know how old he is, but I imagine he's somewhere between 35 and 40. So they actually sang it together. And that was probably one of the more radical events in American popular music uh, in the last few years. Which is not to say that there aren't people like the Dixie Chicks or Bruce Springsteen who are not apologists for uh, the Trump era people. But I remember that one of the things that I found really amusing was Chris Christie loves Bruce Springsteen, and Bruce Springsteen won't give him the time of day. And I think it's like a eternal quest for Chris Christie to actually have Bruce Springsteen talk to him and register some level of approval. It's pretty hilarious given the, you know, political and social profiles of each of them.
Maybe we should move over. That sets up a nice reference point. Thank you, Dick. Um, so I sort of highlighted the why Pete and I and Dick got together to do this thing. Uh, Pete represents the Forward Party of Maryland, and I'm affiliated with the Forward Party, Indivisible, and No Labels. And so we're also trying to use the book club as a way to over time to grow it and see if it's a place where the separate movements can come together and be more collaborative. But it's almost redundant these days because there's so much stuff going on. We really we just pick it up out of the ether. We don't need to talk to each other. It's just out there. So turning to the book, I have four themes that struck me that I wanted to suggest as topics to talk about, and you can agree and talk about those or come up with other things that you came out of your reading. But the first one was the among the Iroquois, they balanced the freedom of the individual with the obligations of citizenship, which we seem to have abandoned. Now it's all about the individual and the responsibilities to be an active participant concerned with the general welfare of the people. No longer seems to be part of the agenda. That would be one theme. And related to that is the balance of distribution of wealth as a function of government. How do you maintain the welfare and stop the world from becoming an aristocracy, an oligarchy, where what Franklin and Jefferson described as a world divided between the sheep and the wolves. And in order to accomplish manage those problems, comes with how did the Iroquois find ways to limit the power, to the power and how are they able to prevent kleptocracy? And what we owe to them is they gave us the Constitution and many of the provisions that are in it, as you've read with the Red Book. They're the basis for the UN Charter. And so, what can they now teach us about how do we establish a new world of peace, justice, and equity as we move out of the world of the hegemony of the United States into what's clearly becoming a multipolar world? So those were the concerns that I came away with. And Pete, it's over to you.
All right. Yeah, I put some of the topics up here on the screen of things that we can get into. So as Arnie said, I'm coming from the Maryland Forward Party, and we're trying to reestablish or redefine what politics is because the way we've gotten to for politics has really stopped working. And we are a party in the sense that we want to be able to influence who gets elected, to start to bring bring back maybe some sanity to the process that we are. And some of the only ways to do that is to become a registered party. So that is one of the reasons we're getting into that. But we are not the type of party that's like, that's in a battle. We actually invite everybody in. We're for things like single primaries, where all of the candidates are all together participating in that. We model that through not only those practices, but in all of the things that we do. So we're bringing in all the voices. We want to listen to all the voices. We want to have conversations. And I think we also want to have conversations through time as well. And so it's one of the things I like about Arnie's approach here and historical amnesia and getting into that. We've been through this before in many ways. How we're doing it now is very unique and very different to the times. But a lot of these conversations have happened in cycles throughout our history going back. We've had these conversations and discussions before. We've figured out solutions and actually implemented them, and then we forgot them again. So if we go all the way back here, the book gives a great description about the founding of the nation, getting started on that, what was happening with the Iroquois Foundation when the Europeans were just settlers on the continent, how that brought together and started to grow. And so there were the concepts of the union that the Iroquois had put together that were carried over into our United States, which led to some of the documents of the founding that we build upon. And then we lost that sense. And we started getting more polarized, and then we brought it back together again. So we went through that with the Civil War. We got polarized, and we came back around and brought ourselves back together again. And then we got polarized again in about the 20s and leading into the Great Depression. And then we brought things back together after that. And we're going through another cycle now where we're getting more polarized. And we have to find our way through to finding that way to come back together again. And that's really where we want to be positioned as the Maryland Forward Party, is bringing that sense of togetherness, listening, and understanding so that we can find the best ways forward.
Pete, could I jump in just for a second? Like I said, I'm affiliated also with the No Labels Party, which I have some problems with, but also there's some wonderful things happening with them. And on June 26th, I believe, they created what's called the Problem Solving Caucus in Congress, which is a certain number of Republicans and a certain number of Democrats from both parties. They get together and meet, and they've been the swing vote on many votes when otherwise it will all crash. And there's going to be a number of senators and congressmen having a panel discussion about what's happening now and where they're going to go forward. So if you go to the No Labels website and sign on and register for the event, you'll be able to watch that. And the other thing that they're trying to do is that they're deciding whether or not they want to become a political party. And I'm advising them against it, and they're not really listening to me, but I'm advising that we need is a coalition between the parties, because otherwise we're going to be competing for membership and competing for resources, and we're not going to be able to accomplish what we need to. So hopefully, again, that this book club will be, if it gets more support and more people to join, this hopefully will become one place where we can do some coalition building instead of competing for the resources and for the membership. Pete, back to you.
Okay. In looking through some of the topics that Arnie and I had pulled out to sort of start with, I thought maybe we might start with this idea of the history of the future. Are we looking at our history, or are we looking at our future? That was one of the things that I noticed in the discussion that was being had in the book, and the different things that they were pulling up about the way the Indians, the Native Americans were talking with the European settlers at that time, Franklin and Jefferson, and that there were many that were expressing on the European side that this was a look back into their past. And they were noticing that a lot of that, what was here in the sense of the the Native American culture was reminiscent of things that they had heard about what Europe was like before Rome showed up and took over, and some of the patterns that were there. But what I thought was interesting is looking in on the point of view from the Native Americans is they had gone through this whole process where they had warring nations and they were trying to figure out what was going on and how they could do that. And they had built this coalition for the Iroquois, which was they called the Five Nations, Mohawks, the Onondagas. I forget the other three of that. They later added in a sixth during the settler time. And for them, there had been this whole warring thing that kind of was like what was happening between the French and the British when they were on American soil. They were fighting with each other over land and resources. And you could see in the writings there that the Indians were looking back at the Europeans as their past. Like, we did this before. We had been fighting about grant lands and all this sorts of stuff. And we had come together and discovered this way of being able to work together as a union. And there was an expression that they put in there with that Franklin captured of, hey, if we can do this, you guys should be able to do this as well. And so it was interesting to see the Indians talking about the Europeans as a reflection of their past and trying to bring them forward to the future. And the Europeans thinking that they were so much further ahead than the Indians that they were also trying to bring the Indians forward in history to where they were. And so there was this kind of a clash of because they both were looking at each other as not so great. Like, you guys, like, we got this figured out. You were behind us. And it was fascinating, I thought, in that both sides had the same opinions of the others. So I'll put that out as a beginning discussion topic if we want to go into that. I think a lot of that drives into a point of view, and when we stop looking at the present and what people are bringing to the conversation, and we start putting people in boxes of like, oh, you're behind the times, you're not like me, we already did that, you just need to catch up with us. We stop having conversations about how do we deal with the present right now, how do we understand how to resolve and how to fix our current problems that we're dealing with regardless of where we are in sort of maybe our evolutionary cycles. So feel free to raise hands, or we only got a few people here, so you can also just pop off and mute if you got some thoughts that you want to toss into the discussion.
Just another quick comment. I'm also a member of something called the Sociological Imagination Group, based on the work of C. Wright Mills and his book, The Sociological Imagination, which is based on seeing the world, imagining what the other is like and how to overcome the original sin of othering. And they're also a sponsor of this group. And the founder, Bernie Phillips, is suffering from pneumonia tonight. Otherwise, hopefully, he would have been here.
Mm.
John, Laura, any thoughts, or you want us to keep yammering, or have we?
I could add a few things that related to this. So one of the things that I found interesting, and after I read the book, I was really excited to continue my learning of the Iroquois Confederacy. And so I went to two museums afterwards and just tried to see, like, how do they still view their past, and how has it evolved? And one of the things that I found interesting, and this is kind of a recurring theme I've seen both in this book and throughout those museums, is that it seems like there's a role of kind of almost an idealized vision of the past, in some ways sanitized to a degree. And historically, I've always wanted to get the most accurate view of the past, get everything as historically 100% accurate as possible, learn what the flaws in each historical figure is, as well as their strengths, and get that most rounded view. But like after going to those museums, I've been starting to wonder, like, is there, I guess, a benefit to the legends of like different people, like Deacon Windha, I think, as well as other like historical figures in, I guess, incentivizing good behavior in present people. That's one of the things, because also with the founders and the way they looked at the Native Americans as being, I guess, similar to their ancestors, it might also be kind of a glorified view of their own ancestors as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think those are some really good points. They each have their value, right? The myth has value, and it gives something to kind of aspire to, or to look at, and how we build our myths helps to capture our goals, our motivations. For me, it's very similar in present day organizations when people put together mission statements and they have vision statements, and they're putting together this picture of what they want their organization or their company to be like. And there's a lot of myth that's built into that. And a lot of them aren't living up to those visions themselves, but they aspire to. And the creation of the myth can be very strong in helping to drive people towards a particular direction.
Yeah, that's exactly where the project I'm working on comes in. But among the people that I use are Carl Gustav Jung and Joseph Campbell, and they both in their work look back to the far back into the past, to the legend of Gilgamesh, and to the other uh, archetypal heroes and themes. And if you look at the Upanishads, or the work of Mencius or Confucius, in the philosophies and religions of India, what we find is in each of these cultures, civilizations, nations, whatever, there's the same parables, there's the same global truths. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is to, in my manuscript, is to show the fact that there is the basis for getting us past the conflict of nations, and sell it, and still have local control over what's going on, but federate at a higher level, getting past civilization based on these archetypal themes and archetypes, and build a more collaborative, peaceful, and collaborative world. So yeah, I agree with you, John.
I would throw in as well that I think multiple things can be true at the same time. So when we get focused on the myth, sometimes we lose sight of the reality. So, for example, in even the two different versions of it, so the Native Americans had a oral tradition, and so they passed down. They talked about in the book itself that they had like the wampum belts, which depicted various different things, and those were pretty set, and they had a particular meaning. But describing what they meant was not written down anywhere. So that was passed down as an oral tradition. And one thing that's nice about an oral tradition is that they can update with the times. And so if the language changes, then the speaker, the storyteller, can change the story to match the locality of that. But the flip side of that is that the story can change over time. And so you may not be hearing the same story as was originally meant. So you take the other flip side of that, of what Europeans and what we have done is really focused on the writing and capturing everything down in a written form. And the benefit of that is you can go back and you can look at what was originally written in those things at that time, in those books and in those pieces, the original versions of manuscripts, and see how they were written. And so it feels more permanent, but at the same time, the language has changed over time. So even though it's written in a certain way, words mean different things now. So you might go back and you look at an old manuscript, and there's a word that's being used that now means something different, but back then means something didn't mean the same thing. We see that a lot, with the Bible and interpretations of that, and people are taking, literal translations of words using current day meanings instead of original meanings. And you actually have to spend a lot of time to really break it down. And very few people have the time to spend to do a real full scholarly thing on this. So we all have these different problems that we're trying to solve, and Native Americans solved it through an oral tradition, and the European approach was to solve it through a written tradition. But they all have their
There's a
drawbacks.
there's a really good example from the Iroquois about a universal parable that actually was picked up. I don't know if he got it just from the Iroquois. I think he got it from a number of cultures, and that's the tree of life, which in the Iroquois Foundation was the pine tree, and the pine tree supported itself and grew tall because the roots grew out. And if anybody then came into the Confederation and accepted the basic truths of the basic beliefs, you were automatically adopted as a member of the tribe, which is certainly parallel to our mythological assumption that we are a melting pot, which we certainly it is not a melting pot. It is more of a boil. But you find the universal tree of life in a number of cultures, and this idea it now hooks up. I'm finding that I'm doing a lot of research on how plant life survives and the underground roots and how they support each other. And it turns out, for one example, that when the conditions are changing in the forest, and some of the older trees recognize that their life is not going to be supported, they will take some of their nutrients and turn them off to the trees that are just developing that are more likely to survive under the new conditions. Or they can signal to each other when the giraffe is in the area, munching on the leaves after the tree has been fed on long enough so it's being endangered. It'll give off a chemical thing that will drive the giraffe onto the next tree. And just like the birds signal to each other, the trees signal to each other. So it's not only universal in terms of human culture. We have a lot to learn, like the Indians already understood about understanding in the that we are fundamentally tied to nature. Uh, and nothing is more significant, I think, right now than we watch these tsunamis and these volcanic eruptions and these tsunamis going around the world. And I can't help but wonder that it's got to be more than the 11-year cycle of the sun, which is now in its maximum, because God knows what the effect is. I've never found any research on what all of this extraction of liquids from the center of the earth does to the cooling of the center or the wobble of the earth or whatever. It may be nothing there. It's less than a hypothesis even. It's just an itch that I scratch from time to time. Dick, you want to sing?
Do I want to what?
Do you want to sing? You want to play for us for a bit here?
Yeah, I'll play you. Let me find it. This is a song about came out of a story in the New York Times. It's something that actually happened, where there was a cop who was also a social worker, and her turf was the West Side. And she developed a friendship with this guy, who was a homeless guy. And there were a couple of occasions where she had to send him to jail briefly. And yet their friendship was maintained through that. And this is what happened. The song tells a story about what happened when he died.
That's one of the things I like about what Dick Weissman's doing is being able to tell history through music and really documenting a lot about what's going on. We were having a conversation earlier about how a lot of the music today has lost some of that connection. I wouldn't say all of it, but some of it has, music was a way to be able to convey some stories that were being lost and not being told.
I'll throw in one of my favorite books is Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, which describes the kind of loneliness and separation that's going on today. And my favorite political, it's not seen as a political lyric, but my favorite lyric in all of contemporary music that goes along with Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone is Miley Cyrus singing, "I Can Love Me Better Than You Can."
I was having that conversation with somebody online about emotional intelligence.
Mm.
And it's reminded me back to Daniel Goleman when he launched, the term for emotional intelligence in his book of that name. And he captures in there and lists the differences of basically one of those 4-quadrant matrices. One was about the self and others. And then the other one was about
I am an officer working the streets
I'll come back to
on
it.
the west side of Manhattan. A man on the block slept on the steps of the church, riding in the subway. He once was a teacher with a wife and 2 kids. Something went wrong, he wouldn't tell me what he did. Maybe it was crack or 50-cent wine. When you live on the street, you put your life on the line. All of the time.
So I don't know if you could hear that, but
We could hear the vocals from it. I think the microphones cut out a lot of the background song music on it.
all that stuff actually happened. That he would stand in front of Zabar's Deli, which is this very famous deli on the Upper West Side. And the people at Zabar's actually did not like him very much because he would hold the doors open for people. But they contributed to the fund for his memorial stone, as did other people that knew her or knew him or whatever. And I think, what it's a little off the subject of what we've been talking about, but I think the problem with protest music or social protest music, whatever you want to call it, is that Tracy Chapman's song "Fast Car" is a great song because it's about a situation that people get into. And probably as long as there are inequities in the society, and I don't know any societies that don't have inequities, there are going to be people who are in that situation. A lot of the other stuff, for example, I personally never cared for Phil Oakes because I felt like everything that he said was, first of all, patently obvious, besides not being particularly musical. And Dylan, who can be very cruel when he's in the mood, has said to Phil Oakes, as he threw him out of a taxi cab, he said, "Oakes, you're not a singer, you're a journalist." Which was very cruel, but in my opinion, absolutely accurate. So you want to write about something that has some social meaning, but if you write about, say, the demonstration in LA that's going on right now, in 2 weeks, that'll be over and something else will be going on somewhere else. So how do you make a song into something that has significance beyond the event itself? So to sort of turn this in a weird direction, which is there are probably three American Indian singers of protest music that are somewhat known. So there was Buffy St. Marie, there was Peter Lafarge, and John Trudell. Okay, so Lafarge was not an Indian. He was the adopted son of Oliver Lafarge, author of Laughing Boy, one of the early novels about Navajos. Turns out that Buffy St. Marie is not an Indian either, that she was an adopted, she had to give up her Juno Awards, which are like the Canadian Grammys, because she has been basically posing as an Indian all during her adult life. And that's what her career is based upon, which doesn't invalidate her music. It just brings a dimension to it that is interesting. John Trudell was the leader of the American Indian movement and was very involved in the occupation of Alcatraz. So the three people doing Indian protest music, and there are about 25 Indian radio stations, I don't know if you know that, in various parts of the United States. Trudell is the only one that in a certain level has credibility, and he's gone too now. But there are other people as well, but they never crossed over into having an Anglo audience. So I think that's one of the real problems with music, not just with Indian music, but anything, which is that if you haven't mastered some sort of promotional apparatus, you're basically either speaking to the choir or you're speaking to the deaf, which is a terrible position for a musician to be in, is to do what they think is significant, but it doesn't resonate with other people because the other people either never hear it at all or have no grasp of the concept. So, what you're basing everything on for them doesn't exist. So, in a way, that's probably true of the entire history of American Indians, right? I mean, what do we actually know about them? What do we learn about them in the school system? We learn about the wars. We learn that they were pushed off of their turf, and maybe 3% of the people teaching in the school system know what the Trail of Tears is and how the Cherokees and other tribes were literally removed from the places that they lived in. So, it's very strange. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether some of that impetus for the civil rights movement presents itself with what's going on now. And now the cause is basically Spanish-speaking people. Not that there aren't Black people from Africa that are being deported and all that, but the majority of people that are feeling that they may be gone are people who come from Mexico or Venezuela or Nicaragua or wherever it is that they came from, south of the border or south of what Trump calls the Bay of America, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of we've running through again. I'm seeing like a lot of these things that we're repeating, in some historical cycles, and it's interesting you take it that way because like now where my brain's going is another part of the book where they were talking about the nature of the citizenship and defining of what that was. And Arnie, you were talking about this of that you could just adopt the principles and become part of that nation. And so I could see like maybe a couple of these speakers that you were talking about, Dick, were considered themselves as part of that Indian nation, even though they were not racially descended and did not have the bloodlines back to that. And as far as America, what we're concerned about when we speak to those things popularly is we are tying it back to bloodlines, and giving that traceability. And we're talking about, a race. And if you say that you belong to a people, you may completely be like those folks. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe Dick, and correct me if I'm wrong here. But they were a part of that Native American nation, and they consider themselves to be part of that nation, and they were speaking about their people in much the
Hey,
same.
can I interrupt you a second?
Yep.
Cliff Chang has been trying to join us for half an hour and can't get in. Could you send him the link? I'll give you his email address.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, I'll just throw in that reading through the Founding Fathers, I can't imagine anybody within any of the six Federation nations having anybody homeless in that kind of a state in the community. It just, I can't imagine it would happen.
Yeah.
He says, I built my entire day so I could be there for your launch. There are other important things I put off. Now I can't log in.
No. All right. Trying to get back to, okay. Using my other device here.
Well, Pete, I think you're absolutely right that Lafarge and St. Marie definitely identify as Native Americans, even though they were not. I think it just raises a whole other set of questions, which are troubling if you're making a career out of a persona that doesn't actually exist. It doesn't invalidate what you say. It just calls, I think everything that we see. I mean, you watch what various politicians, and I would place most Democrats in this as well as Republicans, what they say and what they mean and where they come from are like three different streams that don't coalesce. It's like a polluted river. And, like you all see this thing today in LA with the senator being basically thrown out of the meeting and dragged out of the committee, out of the room. I mean, it's a very hard thing to interpret in that, yeah, this is the face of fascism, okay? But it's also like, why did he decide that he had a part in this little party line thing that she was conducting? He wasn't really invited. He took the initiative, and you could say, well, that's a very minor sin, given the context of the whole thing. But it's not like he's some innocent guy whose father was just murdered and he just can't contain himself. That he's got to confront authorities. And I think I'd be very interested. I mean, I did not read the book because I'm finishing up something that I'm writing and I really don't have a lot of free time. But how does that go down? Like, what happens in Iroquois society if somebody doesn't share all of this? I would certainly grant that that's not going to be for the most part true. But what if it is true for three people out of 1,000? So what do they do? What happens to them? How do other people react? There in my more cynical moments, it seems like democracy is a delusion. That it never quite crystallizes the way the theory comes down. What people actually do is not necessarily what their rhetoric indicates. I mean, I think that
I
was
would,
we presented with Bill Clinton and to some extent with Obama, where you suddenly realize that these people are not exactly what they seem. What they present is one thing, and what they do doesn't necessarily coincide.
which I think gets back to what John was talking about with the myth, creating the myth and the value of the myth, which is necessary, especially in our world, to get elected, versus the reality of what somebody does when they actually get into the office and they're faced with the reality of passing legislation. Yeah. Go for it, John.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting items that can touch upon. I guess one of the things that I think might be helpful if all of you are interested in it, similar to the song, which I thought was a great way of kind of like expressing thoughts and ideas in a, I guess, less conversational way. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that kind of goes over kind of Iroquois culture, what the 5 tribes are. It's like really short, about like 2 to 3 minutes, mostly photos. Would that be of interest to all of you? I can give you an
Yeah,
overview.
that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you currently see a PowerPoint slide?
I do. I see Forgotten Founders brief analysis.
Perfect. All right. So start things off. Just
Let me double
gonna,
check before you get into that. So does everybody
Yeah.
else see that? I had to click on
Yeah,
something
I
to
do.
switch over. All right, Laura, you got it? Great.
Perfect.
Go for it.
Alrighty. So to start things off, this is kind of an overview of my sources, quote unquote, and also just like my journey of understanding like what is the Iroquois Confederacy. So to start things off, I watched an extra history video on Hiawatha. Overall, a great intro. One of the things that I found with pretty much all of these sources is that they differ in some interesting areas. And this kind of goes back to the myth making and also, I guess, how oral histories can evolve over time. And as a result, there can be like, I guess, different interpretations and different beliefs in how things occurred in some times. And then from there, I read the Forgotten Founders book, and that was great, very inspiring, and actually inspired me to go see the Iroquois Museum, which is that upper photo there, which is one of their long houses. And then down below is the Ska-No Museum, which is actually a lot closer to my house and is kind of the Great Tree of Peace and Peace Center. And then from there, I also checked out the 2 an Onondaga Nation and an Oneida Nation websites to also see what their takes are on like their different stories and myths. So going back to the core themes, a few things that stuck out to me was firstly, just with the story of the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee is like, how can you achieve sustainable peace? Especially one of the things that always struck me as interesting about the 5 tribes is that like typically in American culture, when I guess the country tends to come together is when there's like an external, I guess, scary conflict going on that kind of brings people together in that way. And at least from the myths, or I guess the history and just how things came together for the Confederacy, is that there wasn't necessarily an external threat. So I thought that was overall kind of, I guess, a nice
Aside
bright
from the
light in that.
colonists.
Yeah.
Aside from the colonists.
Although, interestingly, with the Confederacy, so like when it actually formed, was one of those things that there's a lot of different interpretations of. I guess the earliest date would be like the very early 1400s, like right before Columbus was coming into the picture, and the, I guess, earliest time that the Confederacy could have been formed, or at least their take on it, is like around the year 1000. So it's interesting in that, like, when that actually occurred is kind of a subject of debate in a lot of ways. And then what influences cultural evolution? We saw that a lot with the Iroquois influencing American culture, and I guess the founding fathers' influence on American culture. and then how to navigate contradictory historical accounts. I got to navigate through that a lot, and then how gender norms impact culture. And then also, just since the Iroquois Confederacy has now, I guess they aren't in their most flourishing time, I guess we can all agree on that. Like, how do nations fall in a way? And firstly, is just the actual name of the Iroquois Confederacy. There's really two names here. First one is Iroquois, and the other one's Haudenosaunee. Iroquois, it isn't like necessarily a bad word. It's not like Eskimo or Oriental, but generally it's like taken from the Algonquin tribe, which were enemies of the Iroquois historically. There's some debate over like the original meaning. It could be the Algonquins calling the Haudenosaunee rattlesnake people, and then the French kind of took that and went with it. Or it could be, as the author mentioned in their book, that it's kind of like the combination of two words, hero and kone. So there's some debate there, but never really get it wrong with Haudenosaunee if you can pronounce it. And then main things about Iroquois culture that I found really interesting is that they're matrilineal. So if two people marry and they have a kid, that kid kind of takes on the clan affiliation of the mother. Also, while they don't necessarily have arranged marriages historically, they typically, when two people do want to get married, they need the mother's and aunt's approval to do so. And also, property is typically owned by the mother figure. Also, the concept of private land ownership is more new. They generally did not do that before the colonists came into being, at least from what I gathered from the museum pieces, and that they were fully an oral history, not a lot of written language. That particular wampum belt there is actually an interesting piece that is designed to, I guess, promote coexistence between Iroquois culture and, I guess, colonial settler culture, basically two parallel lines that don't necessarily intertwine, but run along each other side by side peacefully. That was kind of the idea of it. Whether or not that historically happened, unfortunately, did not seem to be the case. And then also they have a clan-based society. Like the Onondaga Nation, for example, is composed of 9 different clans. Typically, if you want to marry someone, they have to be in a clan that isn't your clan, just to avoid too much intermingling. But then there's the family unit below that and a tribe unit above that. And speaking of tribes, here are those 5 to 6 tribes that appeared. On top are the official names of them, but I can read off the very small text bottom names. So on the far left is the Seneca, and then the one in orange is the Cayuga. The place where I live is Onondaga, and then there's the Oneida, and then to the far right side is the Mohawk. And you'll also notice that that question of the 6th tribe that kind of came into being is that little splotch right in the middle of all 5 of those, and that is the Tuscarora tribe. Interestingly enough, they actually are a kind of migrant tribe. They had land down south of the traditional Haudenosaunee's lands, and actually had to go up after getting into conflict with the colonists, and ultimately they ran up north to avoid slavery and a lot of other bad things. And so they were actually allowed to settle in that land and be an official tribe of the Iroquois Confederation. And then other thing of note is their like mythology of like how they came to being. One of the things I found interesting between the book and like other accounts is, I guess, the role of, and it's the guy whose name I don't really know how to pronounce, but he also goes by the name the Great Peacemaker. So that makes it a little bit easier. In the books, they mention like he wasn't really affiliated with any particular tribe, and also like wasn't a great orator, and really relied on Hiawatha a lot to kind of do a lot of the convincing. Although if you like look at the different museums and the websites, I was struggling to find like that component of it, but it doesn't mean it isn't the case. It could be one of those situations where they really do want to kind of build up the great peacemaker and don't necessarily want Hiawatha to be quite the central figure. So the great peacemaker in this account basically carved a great canoe out of, I think it was white pine or like some type of very I guess, really pretty material, and kind of went around to the different tribes and started trying to convince people. In that, he meant a great clan mother named Johansen, who basically originally she was kind of a neutral party in all of the different conflicts between the tribes. In the historical accounts, I guess in some ways I kind of see her as like media in some areas, where like she really was interested in stories and wanted tribes to, I guess, tell their stories, especially of conflict, which in a way kind of fueled further conflict. So basically, the peacemaker talked with her and really got her on board with the idea of peace. And then after that was Hiawatha, who had his family either killed before he met the peacemaker, or he met the peacemaker, wanted to be peaceful, and then his family was killed by one of the people in his tribe. Either way, he really wanted peace, and was convinced by the peacemaker to do that, and was a big central figure to kind of creating the Confederation. And then lastly, we have Totodaho, who is generally the villain figure of the story. He's the same tribe as Hiawatha, the Onondaga tribe. He was the one that was primarily fighting with all the other tribes. He's generally described as having snakes in his hair, just because he's a bit of a bad dude. And a key component that I thought was really interesting was that they didn't like kill Totodaho. In fact, they like kind of elevated him. He became the person with the veto power, and also his name is now a title. So there's a modern Totodaho. So they gave him some things that he wanted, but at the same time, they didn't give him too much, and they ultimately kind of achieved the everlasting peace that they were hoping for. So it's interesting to see like that balance between like, what do you do with people who aren't interested in peace and do want to sow conflict for their own benefit. And then last but not least, at the Iroquois Museum, they had a cat there named Little Boy, and that was their chief feline officer, which I thought was pretty cool. They had a lot of interesting animals there as well. Any questions?
John, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that was their CFO, the chief feline officer?
Yes, exactly.
Nice. Thanks for putting that together. No, I thought that was
no
great.
problem at all.
Yeah, that was
Welcome. Can you hear us, Cliff?
Yes.
Sorry you had trouble. Welcome.
Well, it's good to be here. It's important to talk about this stuff at this time and reconnect with the original ideas about democracy.
Yes.
Yes.
Glad you could join us.
We are recording, so you'll be able to see the whole thing, but I'm so glad we got you in.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So actually going back into something you were saying there, John, I thought that was fascinating of how they dealt with that, of having that person who was the, as they described, or you described it, like the evil figure, but then they made them a part of the process and gave them some veto power. I've noticed that with some of the organizations I've worked with, that there might be a person who is the stick in the mud, who is dragging things down, who's really slowing things up, and in many places, there's a really good reason for it. They've just gone overboard, and they don't let anything go because nobody's addressing their one thing, and so they're holding everything else hostage. Now, I think there's a part of an issue there where if like one person has one thing and they hold everybody else hostage in order to get an answer to their one thing. But what you just described that they did, you know, the great peacemaker and the process, and the set is that they embraced that person, they listened to that person, they gave that person a voice, and that is also what I find in organizations really helps to work. You know, if you try to get them to like, you know, shut up and get out of the way and stop blocking us from doing stuff, they just come in even more so, and you either need to fire them or get rid of them. Or if you're in like our situation now, you cannot, you know, you cannot get rid of certain people. And I'm not putting names on any of those things, but you cannot get rid of them. And the alternative is to really give them a voice and a step in the process. But like you said, without, they discovered was without giving you too much power. And I think that was one of the things I sort of caught when I watched or when I listened to how they describe their process of building out to the piece. Best pronunciation I could find is Decanawida, for the peacemaker, the person who did that. It's interesting that they talked about how he was he had a really, really bad stutter. And so it just painted this picture in my head of like modern day, probably might be like a geek, classified as a geek in our area, a super smart guy, who had this way of just sort of figuring things out as far as like these systems, and figured out how to do all these different checks and balances inside of their system. And
That's sort of like Moses and Aaron.
Okay. And the thing that I catch is like with each new group that you run into that's bringing up new issues, that has their own initial issues that they're dealing with, if you just say, oh, just follow the process and it'll take care of all your troubles, a lot of people can't do that. And so what Deganawida and Hiawatha and the folks seem to have done there is listen to each thing. And I think they tried to create a system of listening to each, tribe's needs, each person's needs, understanding where they were coming from and integrating that into this new system that they built. And they described a bunch of that in the processes that they did, and they had the elder brother tribes and the younger brother tribes, and they would debate amongst themselves, and then they would have to agree amongst the two sets, and then if there wasn't disagreement, they had to go back. And so there was a lot of this sort of listening process going into it. But I noticed in the passage, and we only get a portion of the history, but they didn't they talked about the treaties, but I didn't hear them describing an adaptation to the Haudenosaunee's format to adapt to the Europeans. They described that the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, wanted the Europeans to show up and do everything the way that the Iroquois did. They wanted them to show up, and they had to have the gifts to provide. They had to have the wampum belts. And if none of this, they had to speak in the language of the Iroquois. And if none of that happened, they weren't even going to start. And, same thing with some of the other tribes, that if you didn't follow the rules that were set out, then that wasn't, then you couldn't participate. And I think there's a little bit of a staticness in there that I kind of read into it. Maybe I'm wrong, but like they had been going for about 500 years at that point. If it went back to like the thousands.
Can I throw something in there, Pete?
Okay.
Because this caught me, and it's really, really interesting. The tribes had a limitation on the amount of money that the chiefs could get. They weren't supposed to profit from office, and they had to give it away. Which maybe at some point we'll talk about why we chose the name Minotaur Book Club. But when they gave each other gifts, it was reciprocal. Mm-hmm. And when the Europeans gave gifts, it was to create dependency. So the meaning of the giving of the gift had two entirely different meanings. And those agreements were totally invisible to both sides. So they thought they were having some kind of a relationship, and they were actually in conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think, unlike how they started the Confederacy, about understanding and all the sides and integrating together, here they were no longer doing that anymore.
That's one of the things that struck me too about like the, I guess, gift giving process and kind of its dual nature. In one way, it's like a great way to kind of show to other groups and nations the amount you value that group, and kind of a pathway to building good relations. On the other hand, it can be like that double-edged sword where, in a way, it's kind of like bribery, and that they might kind of prioritize the value of the gifts over, I guess, the long-term potential for a strong relationship, and how they might have chosen, I guess, poorly in their partners, and that they valued kind of the relationship with the English more because they had the nice gifts, but because I think it was the Dutch or maybe the French that didn't have quite as nice gifts, they didn't think that maybe they could have seeked a more, I guess, even power relationship.
Are we going to avoid talking about airplanes here?
Airplanes?
I'm not getting the connection.
The recent acquisition by our president of a new airplane was a gift.
Oh, right.
Oh, gotcha. Yep,
Let's avoid that.
probably so. So, but I think there's, it was a different set of languages coming through. Europeans had developed a history of there was barter in the early stages, going way back, far enough in history. And then in order to find an equivalence of this much of this thing matches that much of that thing, and that came sort of with the mercantile princes and with the Italian Renaissance, and they started equating this much product is equal to this much currency. And as long as you had the currency, then you could then buy an equivalent, and then setting the prices of stuff made a huge difference in the European market as to how we thought about exchange. And so that was the mindset the Europeans brought over to the land, to the Americas, but the local Native Americans did not have that sense of property. They didn't have that sense of equating something to currency or equating something to a separate value from the thing that it was. And it was like, again, talking two different languages, but this was two different languages of trade.
I'm going to bring this back in because as I'm thinking about it now, it is absolutely relevant because we have used our soft power in order to redistribute resources from the global south to the global north. And now what's happening in Burkina Faso is a repudiation, a recognition that our gifts are not gifts, but creations of power relationships and independency. And so this difference between reciprocal giving of gifts and giving of gifts for dominance is absolutely relevant to what's going on. And one just hopes and prays that we don't do what we've done in similar situations in the past, and assuming that Terrari is not a monster, that he can actually unify Africa and end this maldistribution of resources from south to north.
Right, because that whole thing was there were rulers of different countries inside of Africa who then gave migrant Europeans access to stuff for personal gain, and then country did not gain anything from it. And in return, then the European nations would then take care of that country. And so they would extract the resources and then use the money from that resources to then give back in a philanthropy kind of way to take care of the country. And I've heard some very similar things from some folks out of Africa as well, as they're waking up to this fact of like, we don't need the charity. The only reason you're giving us charity is because you took our resources. Like, we actually own these resources. So if we just own these resources, we can cover ourselves. And there's a false pretense here where a lot of the countries are dependent because the leader in place had been giving away all of their value to other countries in exchange for personal thing. And so there's a big pushback against that now.
So just let me throw in a huzzah here for the basic concept of what we're doing is we can learn from history.
Yes. A lot of this stuff has happened before, and if we can go back and look at our history, doesn't mean that we need to repeat exactly what history did. But we can learn certain things about what already there's a lot of things that we want to do today that has already been done in the past and failed. And if we could eliminate some of those options or ideas, or understand that, we need to be cautious about this because when we did it before, it did not work. Boy, that would be a whole different conversation, wouldn't it?
Well, we can do that next time.
Yes.
Find a book that fits.
And at least for us, we can work with the people that we do and work in our organizations and work within our context to be aware of this. I'll take for my work in organizations, there's a heavy parallel. A lot of teams come in, they're like, I want to do this process because I think it's going to be fantastic. And they're like, well, this team in this other part of the organization tried that already, and this was their result. And some people are like, I don't care. I know I can do it. And you're left with two cases in those point where you either let them do it and fail knowing they're going to fail, or maybe you let them do it and they find some other way to do it that is not, that works, where the other group failed. Or the third option is that you don't let them do it. And now they're pissed off because you didn't let them do the thing that they sure was going to be the answer to all of their problems. But if we only look at our own little sphere of what we know, and we never look at what other people know, then it makes complete sense. As far as I know, this is going to work. I just got to do it, and I don't care about anything else. Those people are going to fail over and over again. But if we get past our historical amnesia and pay attention to where other people have done similar things, learn from them, and then create a new version that maybe has fixed some problems, we're much better off to be able to find a way to succeed in the future.
Right from there, Pete, can we, as part of the continued conversation, talk about how the Confederation of the Iroquois tribes and the Federation of the American states can possibly lead to a understanding what worked and what didn't as we enter this multipolar world and decide how we can reconfigure, newly confederate in a world that in the future will work better than the world that we're leaving behind.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So if we were to think back and the things that we listed or that we saw, that we heard, anybody catch any ideas from the things in the past that worked, or problems in the past that happened that we want to avoid?
One of the things that came to mind during our different discussions, and I forgot who, but one of you brought up a really good point that one of the nice things about the Iroquois Confederation is that if someone wanted to be a member of the Iroquois Confederacy and kind of go over to their culture, they could. There wasn't like a major process to do so. It's more of just, do you embrace their culture, and are you are interested in being a part of that? And one of the things that I guess, big picture, totally theoretical, but like, if it's possible for, rather than kind of moving away from the traditional, you're born in this country, therefore you automatically must subscribe to this different ideals and concepts, maybe, especially now with the internet, there's people that, even though I guess culturally they might be from a place, or geographically they're from a place, but culturally they're from like a different nation in a way. I guess smoothing the process of for people who are interested in, I guess, a matriarchal society, moving to a different country that promotes that, or vice versa. I guess that's my messy way of saying that. Like, is there a way in which citizenship is, rather than something that you, I guess, is a fixed asset that you always possess? It's something that you can trade and also, I guess, adopt different cultures more easily. So I guess people feel less imprisoned in certain places.
Yeah, again, I mentioned this before, but this might be a time to repeat it, is that through history, we've moved from smaller, less complex groups into larger groups, but we've been able to nest our identities, much like Russian dolls. So I'm from Rutland, Vermont. That's my core. But I recognize New England and I have it within the United States, but I also have an aspiration to be a global citizen. And that is not possible because the highest level that most public people recognize is Western versus Eastern civilization. But what an understanding of the history of the archetypes and archetypal themes of East and West is that there are universal beliefs and themes that go across that. And the challenge for our age as we go to the multipolar world is to be able to retain our identities as they exist now, nested within a more global thing that gets us beyond civilization to the fact that we're one species on one planet.
Laura, thanks for putting the article in there. Do you want to give us a quick introduction on it? What did you find?
Sure. I found this article just based off of the last volunteer meeting we had with the Maryland Forward Party, where somebody had provided a basic free class in American governance. And this was one of the links that they had provided, though, but it really has to do with how it is a bit older, but I think it reads very interesting in today's context as well, because it's just speaking about mostly how language is perceived by many countries as the primary source of being one of us. That is truly where your national identity is, and not maybe so much your birthplace. But I think obviously, we're seeing both of those on the rise right now. You weren't born here, you don't look like us, you don't speak like us. Right. So you're not necessarily one of us. But it gives a lot of, it just shows a lot about what different perceptions, depending on what countries you are and where being born in certain countries is a much more strong indicator of your national identity versus in other countries. So it's a pretty quick read, but interesting nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Is anyone familiar with Andreas Wimmer's work?
Don't think so.
He's the go-to scholar on nationalism.
Okay.
He's appointed both to sociology and political science at Columbia. So I see him.
What's his name again, Cliff?
Andreas Wimmer.
Okay.
Andreas, last name Wimmer.
I think a bunch of people are going to be doing some research after this.
Yeah, well, Wimmer's work is very rigorous. He's the go-to scholar on nationalism. He's widely cited. So I've gone to his sessions at both the American Sociological Association and in recent years with the book that I'm writing on COVID-19 anti-Asian hate and the resurgence of authoritarianism. I've been hanging out over at the American Political Science Association in the democracy and authoritarian section. I was to meet Jason Stanley there, but he didn't show up. I stayed an extra day just to meet Jason Stanley, and he didn't show up.
Mm.
Yeah. Cliff, are you going to be in Chicago for the ASA?
No.
Okay.
No. I hope to be there next year in New York City.
No. Yeah, this idea of the I think here's where my brain's going. The authoritarianism, for me, I'm seeing as a throwback a bit to, not more than a bit, to monarchy mentality and thinking. And I think that, I've been thinking a lot about monarchy versus democracy. And one of the things that was going on in the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, was they were looking at ways to do the checks and balances and create this thing where it didn't matter what religion you came from, where you were born, as long as you agreed to abide by the laws, you were able to participate, which is a much more democratic process. And that was clashing with, the British Empire, which didn't want, independence. They much preferred, having a top-down monarch or governors in the various different states, and people having one choice, and everybody follows the choice of the leader, which is that strong monarchy type thinking. And I think that's what we're sort of balancing against or battling with right now. There's still a bunch of people out there who are like, I want to find the leader and follow the leader. Like, that's a good option. And so they're picking a leader and then just doing whatever they say. And they're fighting against those of us who want democracy, who are like, there's plenty of different options out here, and we should have a dialogue and figure out what's the best solution to tackle here. So I think looking back, we are fighting authoritarianism. We're fighting the resurgence of monarchy thinking and trying to hold on to our democracy.
Can I throw out a brief 50-cent tour through the last 80 years in the United States on this topic, and how we got to where we are today in terms of the oligarchy and authoritarianism. I would begin in 1951 with Russell Kirk's publication of The Conservative Mind, in which he identified, at that point, the income tax rate, I think, was still 71%, and the middle class was 60% of the country. And Russell Kirk decided that if the wealth and innovation in a world competition with Russia is going to keep us healthy, we needed to cut back on the middle class. A few years after that, Margaret Thatcher said there was no such thing as society, and began this notion of radical individualism that we suffer from today. Meanwhile, the racist Ludwig van Mises gave birth to Friedrich Hayek, who then associated with Arthur Betts Laffer and with Milton Friedman to create the Chicago School of Economy, which says that the blessed be the market that giveth and taketh away, with no sense of justice or fairness or equity, and absolutely defeated the notions of Karl Mannheim, who they labeled as a socialist in terms of doing social diagnosis and strategic planning. History has proved that ironically, that the path of the Chicago School has led us to oligarchy, and what they said about Mannheim and diagnosis and social change would have prevented that. And it's that communalism that's in the Iroquois nation, and the caring for the least of these that would have taken us to a very different place historically. In 1973, later to become Supreme Court Justice Powell, suggested to the corporate heads that what they needed to do is get involved in politics, and as we reduce the middle class, we need to get more corporate control and corporate management of the country. And they talked the Koch brothers into funding them, and that was the path to Project 2025. So Reagan, who said that the government is the problem, had helped to launch this. So I would say since 1951 up through today, there's been a steady march to get us to the point where we are today. And a key point in that was when Newt Gingrich decided that he needed to send Congress home 3 days out of the week to fundraise, and so that the politicians in Washington sent their families, their wives, and their kids and their husbands home, so nobody in Washington talks to each other anymore. And then the corporate money came in, and regardless, if you follow Greg Palacis, the financial analyst for the New York Times, you can see the pattern of people being thrown off the voter rolls, and the diminishment of voting booths and other things. So while I hold the idealist picture of the Iroquois up as a way that federation can succeed, that's in contrast with the the devastation I see of this actually planned attack on American democracy that the Democrats and the progressives never picked up on and never defended against. So be happy if anybody can show me wrong, because I would love to be wrong on this.
Oh, well, so Sarni, in the rest of the group, what do you guys think about the communitarianism of Amitai Etzioni? Did he have something viable there? He died a few years ago. He and I were both interested in privacy, so I've done some things with him around privacy. But I always enjoyed talking to him, and the things he was trying to do, finding a middle way. But so, what do you guys think about that?
Cliff, I'm astonished we haven't met, because I went to sociology, anthropology, economics, liberal legal, and political science conventions, and 2 or 3 times a year I always met Amitai. Uh, I think he was really onto something.
Mm, yeah. Well, too bad he's gone.
Yes.
And his university did nothing to honor him, and that just wasn't right. I mean, well, he was professor of a university, so I don't think he went into campus very often. And it didn't seem to me that he had very strong ties to campus. And So he was in a public policy school in his last period, and he was away from sociology, and he was away from his core supporters. Yeah, it's just he more respect should have been paid for him and the things he was trying to do. I wanted to learn more about what he was trying to do, but there just wasn't time.
Uh, Let me give you a quick anecdote. I was at George Mason University back from 76 to 84, and I was on the college-wide curriculum committee deciding what would count for non-Western studies. And
Mm,
I would argue that anthropology should be included in non-Western studies, because the way the world was developing, there was no way we could predict we would encounter, and our students needed to be able to understand different peoples and different cultures, uh, and have that techniques available to them. I was voted down and ostracized, and finally they looked at me in exasperation and said, "Arnold, this is totally insane. The only enemies our students will ever meet are China and Russia, and they don't need to know about anybody else." And that was the atmosphere that Amitai was facing, and we're still facing today.
Hmm.
Do we need
I
to
can
talk
say
about next books or wrap up, or what do we need to do,
that.
Pete?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to add in one thing here, which is sort of principle for what we're trying to do some with the Maryland Forward Party. So like I was not familiar with communitarianism, so I can't really speak to that. But one of the things that we are very much looking at is we put it under the moniker prioritize problems. But basically what we're saying is we want to be able to look at all the different issues. We want to be able to understand from each side, just like we were describing here with the book about, here's the perspective of the Iroquois Confederacy, here's the perspective of the Europeans. Within, monarchy versus democracy. Within communitarianism, versus, I don't know, versus whatever. Each one of these things is trying to solve a problem. And the question that comes up is, what problems are they trying to solve? Understanding those. But then also, what problems are they causing in the implementation of that thing? And are some of the problems being caused more important than the problem being solved? And then we can do the flip side for anything else that's there, for any of these other alternatives, for the vision of the conservatives in the Chicago school. What problems were they trying to solve? in putting together and putting so much focus on the marketplace, and what problems did they end up creating? And which of those problems is the worst problem? And we tend to just forget about the sources and just go all in on the implementation of the idea, driving it all the way to its end in a little box where we just stop paying attention to the damage that we're causing. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to really push on, to change the way that we have dialogue and to change that we do this. And part of the reason why we want to support this book club here was to really look at those differences and contrasts, understand them fully, so that we can not repeat the mistakes of history, but not also just re-implement what we did in the past, but find a new thing, find that new approach that takes more into account, that solves more problems for more people in more situations, or even offers up different alternatives. So if you have this problem, you get to work with this solution. If you have that problem, you get to work with that solution. And we don't have a one-size-fits-all kind of platform for doing anything inside of our country. So that would be one of my sort of general pitches there for us to carry forward, and at least what we're trying to change when it comes to dialogue inside of the political space.
Cliff, let me ask you a question. It may take some unpacking. I think you and I are going to be able to say this quickly, but we may have to translate. What stand do you take between the three people, the offensive realism of John Mearsheimer and the defensive realism?
Jump in. I think that's going to take, we only have like 10 minutes left.
Yeah, you're right. Another time. Sorry.
Yeah, another time. So
good job.
You totally should exchange some information and and kick off into that stuff.
Good. Go ahead.
So, all right. So we're looking at potential things to talk about next. We had a couple. So Arnie, you had a couple ideas, some of the other founding documents to put in. We wanted to get everybody's here's opinions and thoughts on things as well. Another idea that actually Arnie tossed out that I thought was fantastic is that we don't always have to read books. There is some biographies, like there's a biography of John Adams that was turned into a TV series that I think is running on Max. And so that might be another thing that we do, where we could actually go watch, the episodes of the show and come back and talk about that. Not the dramatized versions of things, but the ones that are actually based on biographies. So we are looking a little bit more in the historical context of things. But Ani, what were the other books that you were talking? So one of them was the Federalist Papers. What were the other options?
The Federalist Papers are online as an Audible for 99 cents.
Okay.
I think we don't need to do all of the chapters, but if we're looking at rebuilding our understanding of the world from the perspective of the founders to see what worked and what didn't, I think the Federalist Papers would be a good place to start. Another one I would consider would be Thomas Paine, Common Sense. And I'm tempted, but I would like to put off suggesting any of the books by Tom Hartman on the hidden history of the Supreme Court, hidden history of neoliberalism, and so on, because I would like to stay with, if you agree, with the founding documents for at least a while.
Okay. So we got Federalist Papers, we've got
Common Sense.
Common Sense by Thomas Paine.
Autobiography of Ben Franklin.
Okay. Oh yeah. Autobiography of Ben Franklin, or the biography of John Adams. So
or Samuel Adams. That's another great book.
The beer? No. All right. So who's got thoughts? Or we like to do ranked choice voting at Forward Party. So if you were to list those in order, what would you do? And you can type them into chat if you want to, or you can come off mute. So Laura, what's your vote?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to keep to some of the, sort of the foundational things we're talking about. So the Federalist Papers or Common Sense, both of those are of interest to me. I am intrigued by the biographies, but oftentimes those are pretty heavy tomes. So.
Okay. So if you were to pick one between Federalist Papers and Common Sense, what would be your vote?
I'd probably say the Federalist Papers, but that's just me.
All right. Okay. What about you, Cliff? How would you rate them?
Oh, well, Fellow's paper sounds fine to me too.
All right. John, what's your vote?
I am good with the Federalist Papers as well. I guess in the topic of throwing out potential future ideas, one of the things that came to mind was that since we are such a new book club, is there I guess any books about I guess early formation of the I guess founding fathers organizational groups? I'm also just trying to think of how can I help our book club grow and I guess just achieve the best we can. So just thoughts out there, but Federalist Papers definitely for me.
All right. Dick, what are your thoughts?
You're too busy. You're trying to finish a book,
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
but still show up with the banjo or without.
I think I'm reading a book about homeless people in Atlanta. It's pretty interesting. There are all these books appear and then they disappear. And it's a very interesting perspective because it's not a theoretical book, especially. It's mostly life histories and what's going on with these people. And I suppose I'm more inclined in that direction than, between, the various things that I do, I don't have unlimited amounts of time
Yeah.
to read stuff, and probably the historical stuff is of less value for me personally.
All right.
So it looks like it's the Federalist Papers.
I think that's got
And
the most votes.
you got the most votes, and I can send everybody a link to how you can get it on Audible version for 99 cents from Amazon.
Yeah, we'll pull that together because I did that on Audible as well, and I ended up with a commentary about the Federalist Papers instead of the Federalist Papers themselves. So let's make sure we get the good
Make
link
sure
out
you got
there
the
for
right
everybody
link.
to
Yeah.
click on the right one.
Yeah. Yeah, and Chang, but apologize for Cliff. I apologize for getting you the wrong link for tonight. I wonder how many other people are out there searching.
Yeah, we'll get everything over onto the meetup group and have that with a single definitive link. Arnie, we never did talk about the origins of the Minotaur concept for the book club. You want to wrap us up with that and just sort
Yeah.
of get us into the philosophy of that? And why don't you go ahead and take us home?
Okay, so again, with the Joseph Campbell, Gustav Jung notion of looking for universal archetypes and archetypal themes, and we go back to the origins in Mesopotamia and the Isle of Crete, and King Minos is coming into power. And back then, what we today call charisma, back then they called semi-divinity. And he wanted to rule as a demigod. So he talked to Poseidon and said, "Listen, I'm taking over the kingship here, and I'd like to rule as a demigod. Can we make a deal?" And Poseidon says, "Sure. I will send you this magnificent white bull as a sign of that you have been elevated, and you will sacrifice the bull to me, recognizing that your authority is based in my godlike eminence." And so the deal is consummated, and the bull arrives, and Minos looks at it and says, "Oh, great broodstock. We're keeping this sucker." And Poseidon says, "I'm pissed. So he makes minus his wife, Persephone, fall in love with the bull, and she goes to the architect Daedalus and says, "Build me a shell of a cow, so that the bull can enter me." And I am in love with the bull. So Poseidon enters the bull, and the bull enters Persephone, and the Minotaur is born. So the parable of the Minotaur is the gods get pissed when you convert a public good into a private interest.
All right. On the graphic side with the story, but the overall theme of, yeah, like being very cautious about taking a public good and turning for personal use.
Which the Iroquois had wonderful things about it. It was an impeachable offense, and if you remember from the reading of it, and that was the origin of the potlatch. The tribal chief could never take the first pick of the gifts. He also had to take the last gift. The welfare of the people came before the elevation of the king, which may have some relevance for today.
Maybe so. All right. I have a friend who does a quick retro, which is asking two questions of going around of like, what's one thing that you liked about what happened tonight? And what's something that you thought that was missing or that we could do for next time?
I will say I liked the spontaneity of including the presentation, and I really appreciated that. That was great. I particularly liked it because I recently had been in Albuquerque and had gone to like the Pueblo and cultural centers and had met some locals, and so I really liked that. Trying to think of the other one. What was the other question? It was, oh yeah, for our retro.
Anything, yeah, that you thought was missing or that we should add in for next time? Doesn't have to be missing, but you're like, what if we did this next time?
I don't know. Nothing jump into mind for that one right now. Maybe I'll know better after our second session.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Laura.
Pete, don't forget to find out if these time period every second Thursday or whatever is in the time frame works best for everybody.
Oh, it's a good. Yeah, so we'll add that in. So Laura, is this good time frame good? Second Thursday?
Yeah, that should work for me.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go around the screen. So John, you're up next on my screen. So what popped out for you? What did you like? What was something that maybe is missing or you want to add for next time? And what do you think of the time slot?
Yeah. So to be honest, this meeting flew by because it was all very much good. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your great insights. This was a great kind of organic movement of ideas. Also want to say thank you to Dick for showcasing that great song. It kind of really kind of showed how like conversation doesn't always have to be verbal. It can also be like through music or presentation. So yeah, that is wonderful. Thank you. And I guess as far as areas in which it can further improve, really the only thing that comes to mind is just I would love in some ways, and this doesn't even have to be during the book club, but like if there's any like organizational assistance I can provide, let me know. More than happy to assist where I can to help the book club grow. And aside from that, oh yeah, meeting times. That works with me. Yeah, I'm totally free. Every other Thursday, was it?
Mm-hmm. Every second Thursday of the month.
Oh, okay. Yep, that sounds good to me.
Great. Yeah, if you want to put your email in chat, and that'd be great if you could help out organize it.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
All right, Cliff, you're up next.
Well, I came in late, so I don't really have very much to say. Yes, please do send us a Zoom link so I don't have to mess with logging into Meetup. As far as the time slot, if it could be later, that would be good. Uh, um, so Arnie, I hope that these sessions don't conflict with our other book club in uh, the Retired Sociologist Network.
I don't believe they do, but I'll double check. I don't think
Yeah.
that they do.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's good.
Good.
Yeah.
And,
Wait,
and,
what,
and,
what,
and also those retired sociologist discussions that they have. Those two things usually go on Thursdays.
that's right. Uh, I
Yeah.
will
Well,
check my
anyway,
calendar while we, yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you very much. See you guys next time.
All right, thanks, Cliff.
Okay,
Dick,
bye.
so how about you? What were your takeaways?
Um, I was very interested in the Iroquois presentation, um, and just hearing what different people's perspectives are. Um, as far as anything else, like I'm interested, okay, so we have this picture of the Iroquois. What went on between the Iroquois and the Algonquins, who were traditional enemies? Why
Mm.
were they enemies? How was this handled in this utopian context? Like suddenly you have this other. Also, I didn't know anything about the Tuscarora thing coming up from North Carolina. That was fascinating to me that they become sort of honorary Iroquois, so to speak. So I'd never heard of that before. So that was really intriguing to me. And like I said, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of a reject from graduate school in sociology in Columbia before I decided what I wanted to do when I was growing up. And so the historical stuff is of less interest to me because there was a mouthful of it there. I remember Talcott Parsons was just emerging from the mist, and the big sociologist at Harvard was where he was Sorokin. And Sorokin sent out these secret memos that Parsons was a fraud. And in the middle of all this, I suddenly realized, is this really what I want to do? And the answer was no. Uh, so, there is that part of me that probably lacks the requisite respect for academia that I probably should have, but don't. There's just too much that's going on that doesn't show itself on the surface.
Gotcha.
So
You were smarter than I am, Richard.
I'm always looking
Arnie
at,
went all in.
yeah, what is there besides what I'm being fed? Just the way I look at any of the political sphere. And
Yeah.
I think it's sort of tragic that academia has come down to that, but it's a function of way things work. If you're the new guy on the block and your books are selling in the various courses, then we're supposed to pay attention to you, and to me that's always been uh, I don't like uh Eminem better than I like John Coltrane, even though one of Eminem's record outsold all of John Coltrane's oeuvre, I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
reality. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but it's just, it doesn't mean anything to me. And I guess that's just the way my process works.
All right. Arnie, what was your top takeaway? Something maybe was missing or that you want to add for next time?
Who are you
Me?
asking?
Oh,
You.
oh.
Me.
Yes.
I loved it. Just delightfully surprised by John's jumping right in there with that information. That was absolutely wonderful, and I think Laura said something about the unscripted way in which this thing just evolved, and to me, the process that you're introducing us to find a way in which you can have these collaborative conversations that work rather than the stage what do they say, the sage on the stage instead of the something on the something. It's just you know, I would not want to have listened to me for an hour. This was much better. So I thank you for modeling the process, and process is part of what we're trying to uh, model.
Yeah. All right. I'll also echo that. So, John, I have a phrase that I use from the Ratatouille movie. So not every idea is going to be a great idea, but a great idea can come from anywhere. And so love looking for those opportunities. And I love it every time we find anything unexpected. So I was not expecting your presentation, John, but that was absolutely delightful. And I loved how you went and did the research and visited the places and took the pictures, and then put that all together for us. So very much appreciate all that work that you put into it. And thank you for sharing your discoveries about the history and the context. Gave a good setting for us.
And somebody mentioned building the movement, and Pete has recorded this session, and we'll be sending a link to all of you. And to the extent that you want to share that and build upon and see if we can organically grow this thing, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
And again, the overriding idea is to there's wonderful people out there in many organizations that are doing great things, but we're fighting over membership, and we're fighting over resources, and we're trying to build a place where we can come together as a coalition and be a swarm of ants rather than a bunch of individuals out there doing our own thing collectively.
I might also tie it back to the book and say, in the same way that the Haudenosaunee and the states, came together and created their unions, you don't have to give up your own personal identity, your own personal nation, in order to come together and create a coalition that works for the good of all. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, and we will call that it for tonight's book club. Thank you so much for coming. If you want to stick
So
around,
happy to
chat
meet
a
you
little
all.
bit.
This was yeah. I had the feeling that the beginning of friendships, and Dick and I we write back and forth about once a week, but this is the first time we've been face to face since when did I live with you? About 1963.
Something in there.
Something in there.
The
All
ghost of
right.
Talcott Parsons.
Oh, real quick. Have any of you ever have you ever seen the movie RPI?
Mm-mm.
Okay,
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Revolutions per Minute.
Okay.
The book Sociological Imagination by C. Wright Mills was voted the second most important sociology book of the 20th century. And a movie was made out of it, starring Anthony Quinn playing C. Wright Mills and Anne Margaret playing his graduate student. And I'm sitting in the theater, and Anne Margaret and Anthony Quinn are in bed discussing Talcott Parsons. And I literally rolled down that aisle. You might want to look that up, Dick.